Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Just before coming here, I was reading in Sri Caitanya-caritamrta about Lord Chaitanya's kirtan, in which he would forget himself. There wasn't him or Puri, or there was just him and the holy name. And he would dance and sing, and it would go on for hours and hours like that. So that's the perfection of kirtan. Kirtan siddhi. When we're chanting, if we can just not be aware we have a body at all, how to transcend the consciousness of I am this body. You can sit in a cave and try and meditate. I'm not this body, but it's hard. Even to find a cave which no government restrictions on it. But we can all, it's open for us every time we chant the holy names, just to become so absorbed that we don't even know we exist. There's just Krishna as his holy name. So we can try for that. That comes from service attitude, prayer. That's it. That's the success. Hare Nama, Hare Nama, Hare Nama, Eva Kevalam, Kalonas, Chevanas, Chevanas, Gatiranyata. The holy name is the way in this horrible age of Kali. The way to realize God. Everything is there in the holy name of Krishna. Srila Prabhupada gave us this greatest gift. There's an anecdote from his early days in New York City. This would be 1965 or 66, before he had any followers, probably 1965. He had some little handbills printed up with the Hare Krishna mantra on it. And one person remembered that Prabhupada handed him this handbill with a big smile on his face. And he said, he gave this to me as if he was giving me the whole world. And he couldn't understand it. It was just some piece of paper with some words which he couldn't. What's all that about? But actually, Prabhupada was so happy to give not the whole world, much more than the whole world. The holy name of Krishna is worth more than everything in the whole world. What is this world? It's just some bubble that comes up for a short time and then it goes again. And we have our little lives which we give so much importance to, which is a tiny sneeze and you miss it. In terms of eternal time, our whole life is just like that. Here and gone. But our eternal connection is with Krishna. And Srila Prabhupada in one place wrote that a pure devotee is one who realizes that the holy name is non-different from Krishna. That's one way to define a pure devotee, that the name is Krishna. Jainam Shri Krishna, Bhajanishta Kare. That name is Krishna, and Bhajanishta Kare. We should worship with that full faith. I prepared a talk here, as some of you are going out daily for distributing Srila Prabhupada's books. I saw maybe 3 mornings ago, both Janardhan Krishna Prabhu and Charan Prabhu, after a day at the airport distributing books. Some mercy was coming down. You were experiencing that in Mangalarti. Was it? There's some special mercy that you get from this Sankirtan, distributing this knowledge of Krishna consciousness. It's inexplicable. Why should it be that by going and giving books to people, you feel so much bliss? That is the proof. What is the proof that God exists? What is the proof that, shall I say, chocolate tastes nice? No, we're not allowed to eat chocolate. What is the proof that gulab jamuns taste nice? You can give a whole class on biochemistry, how there's these certain chemicals interact with there has to be some rasa, has to be some water on the tongue, otherwise it doesn't work. And then this is, I don't know how it works, I'm just fluffing it as I go along. And that makes some sensation, and then that activates certain hormones or neurons within the brain, and and you experience. But, well, that's the example, there's another example given, isn't it? That you can talk about honey, how you can have a jar of honey and say, yes, it's very nutritious, it's very tasty, and comes from such and such a place, organic, and this and that, but you can't, what is that? What is the value? You can experience by tasting it. So, God exists, yes. You can argue up, down, inside out. Ultimately, it's to be experienced, and Krishna makes himself available by his holy name. And this is also by going out and distributing these books. It's giving others the chance to come to this chanting of the holy name. And Krishna gives so much mercy, and you can experience that. It's not just theoretical. So I prepared a talk about Srila Prabhupada's greatest. Srila Prabhupada is the greatest. Is that right? Krishna is the greatest, but he's the greatest distributor of Krishna consciousness in the modern age. So I want to speak about his greatest grief, his greatest pleasure, his greatest success, his greatest propaganda. Krishna book distribution, Srila Prabhupada wrote in a letter, Krishna book distribution is our greatest propaganda for spreading Krishna consciousness. He specifically said, Krishna book. He would say different things at different times. Sometimes he emphasized Bhakti Godhead distribution. Set distribution. In this particular letter, he emphasized Krishna book distribution. This was maybe around 1970, I can't remember exactly, when this was, Srila Prabhupada got this printed, Krishna book, for the first time. He translated it from Sanskrit, and then he got it printed, and of course in those days devotees had no money, and that was another miracle, how he got the money, $19,000, which was a large amount of money at the time, from George Harrison. That's also another miracle story. Maybe you know that story, how Prabhupada told Shama Sundar to ask him to sponsor this printing. Because the devotee had no money. They'd go, there's a description how they'd get watermelons donated in the market, and after taking the watermelon out, the fruit, they'd keep the rind and they'd cook that, and that would be their vegetables. For instance, and we go to the market, and the vegetable sellers would give us all their stuff which was getting old and all this. So that was a whole story, how Shamasundar didn't want to ask George for money, because he said, I never asked him for anything. Just whenever he wants to give something, I let him, because otherwise everyone who approaches George Harrison, they want money from him. So George was appreciative of Shama Sundara and other devotees who didn't ask him for money. They did kirtan with him when he offered to give something. So Shama Sundara was very reluctant. Anyway, he went to his house, and it was evening time, and it was getting dark outside, and Shama Sundara were talking, and Shama Sundara thought, well, I have to do it. I told Prabhupada to do it. So he said to Shama Sundara said to George that, well, you see, Prabhupada's translated this book. We need $19,000 for printing it. And I was just wondering if you could donate it. And George's face just changed. Like, no, he's asking me for money. And just at that time, there was big thunder and lightning, and all the lights in the house went out. And then after a few minutes, it came back again. And George was smiling. He said, well, you can't argue with that. So that was it. So Srila Prabhupada got it printed and then shipped to America. And devotees had no idea, what are we going to do with this? Because they would go out and do kirtan in the streets, and people would give quarters, and they'd give them a Back to Godhead magazine. And at the end of the day, they might have $5 or $10, and that might be just enough to cover the daily expenses. Nowadays, $5, what will you do with $5? Well, you could buy a small book. But the value of money has changed. So they had no idea how to distribute it, but Srila Prabhupada was insisting that you have to do it. He was saying that if you don't, what's the point of my being here? He was so insistent. So somehow or other devotees started distributing these books. They were amazed that anyone would take them, because it just seemed so strange to them. Nowadays, you walk outside dressed like this, no one looks twice. But in those days, it was something quite unusual to be dressed like this and with a shaved head. And a lot of people, they didn't like it much, or they were somewhat afraid. And the picture of Krishna, and they had no idea what's it, especially KRSNA with dots underneath it. And even today, people are, what is that? What's all that about? So devotees were very apprehensive, but they were able to start distributing. And devotees had they were just thinking, this is the first time in the history of the Western world that people are getting information about who God is, because they have the word God. They have some concept, they have some idea, but very little idea. In the Bible, he is the Alpha and the Omega, which means the beginning and the end. And he creates everything. And then if you are lucky enough to join the right church, you go to heaven, and if not, he chucks you into hell forever. And that's about it. They don't know much about him, but here there's so much information about what he does, what he likes, who are his friends, and it's in great detail. So it was very inspiring for them that they're giving actual knowledge of God for the first time in the Western world. So Srila Prabhupada wrote that Krishna book distribution is our greatest propaganda for spreading Krishna consciousness. I'm taking out letters and statements in which Srila Prabhupada is using the word my greatest, or our greatest propaganda. Then another one, my greatest pleasure, to see books being printed and distributed profusely. Srila Prabhupada took pleasure in seeing people take prasadam. He loved that. He loved the Rath Yatra with mass distribution of prasadam. He loved so many. He loves to see the devotees chanting. But he said, my greatest pleasure to see books being printed and distributed profusely. Then in the mood of a war, Srila Prabhupada wrote, I am very glad to hear how the book distribution is increasing more and more. This is our greatest weapon. The more the books are distributed, the more the ignorance of the age of Kali will be smashed. Yeah, a lot of people saying a lot of things, but it's all, everyone's talking on the platform of ignorance. They don't know who they are, that we are eternal spiritual beings, and no idea. So Srila Prabhupada wrote, the world is feeling the weight of this Hare Krishna movement, especially in your country. He was writing to Balavanta in America, because at that time there were court cases being made against our movement and brainwashing. They said so many things. Was that Charadeshna who told us, or Balabhadra? He told us he went to he was distributing books. About 2 or 3 years ago, he came and he was distributing these books in Alabama or somewhere, and the sheriff caught him. Huh? Was it Devamrit? No, it was someone here said. No, it's somewhere in the south. He got a hold of him and said, "There's 3 things wrong with you. One thing, you're a Hare Krishna. The next thing, you're black. The next thing, you're in my county. Get out of here." Was that Shiki Mahit he said that? Yeah, he was telling what a hard time he had. So if you're black, it made things more difficult, but it was difficult for everyone. In London, I also had the same experience. That I remember one time we all went out. We just got outside the gate to go on Harinam Sankirtan, and what they called a Black Maria, which means a police van, came rolling up and just chucked everyone in, as many as they could. We hadn't even started chanting. And these black police vans with no windows, and they just throw you in. I escaped that time. Many times we'd get arrested just for selling books and chanting. So it was Srila Prabhupada gave these analogies. These books are our weapons. We're fighting against Maya, because it was really like a fight in many cases. Another one, Srila Prabhupada wrote, the books are selling, that is our greatest success. There's one section in that book, The Mood and Mission, the symptoms of Srila Prabhupada's success, he says in different ways. Young people joining, opening new temples. So he says in this case, the books are selling. Now what about Srila Prabhupada's greatest grief? This is from a lecture he gave in Los Angeles in 1973. They have no knowledge. Still they're passing as scientists, philosophers, and they're misleading persons. He's talking about the leaders of society and the scientists and philosophers. They don't know, and they're misleading people. Prabhupada said, this is our greatest grief. Therefore, I am requesting you all, just make a plan to face these rascals and defeat them. They are misleading the whole human society. Now the Krishna consciousness movement should take this turn. They may not think that these boys and girls, so-called Krishnas, they are sentimentalists, chanting and dancing. That is, of course, the ultimate goal, but they do not understand. They think that we are simply sentimental. We are the greatest scientist, we are the greatest philosopher, we are the greatest humanitarian. They should know that. So yeah, chanting and dancing, that is the ultimate goal, but people just take it as some sentiment. But there's the greatest philosophy behind this. So Srila Prabhupada wanted that the people should know that and challenge them and defeat all these wrong ideas. Just like Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was chanting and dancing in Varanasi. Thousands of people were joining him. But there was a small number, the intellectual and so-called religious elite, who were very critical of him. And when they met him and said, why are you doing this? You're a sannyasi. You shouldn't be like a sentimentalist. You should study Vedanta. And then Lord Chaitanya sat with them and discussed Vedanta and showed them how he did know Vedanta and they didn't. They thought that they knew Vedanta and he didn't, but he showed them that he knew. And then when he convinced them, what did he do? He engaged them in singing and dancing also. So that's the challenge that Srila Prabhupada gave to us, that we should also meet people and discuss and show that there is great philosophy here. Srila Prabhupada said, now the Krishna consciousness movement should take this turn. They may not think that these boys and girls, so-called Krishnas, they are sentimentalists, chanting and dancing. So up to that time, the movement was mostly known for chanting Hare Krishna in the streets, which created quite a sensation at the time. But Srila Prabhupada wanted more. His greatest grief, this evolutionary, this theory of biological evolution, that chemicals, well, the whole thing, it goes back to Big Bang, and then there's infinite mass in infinitesimal space, which explodes in such a way that everything comes out in such a manner that it gives rise to the conditions in which life can arise. And on top of that, we have then biological evolutionary theory. I was just reading something a few days ago in which it said that if Charles Darwin had known what scientists today know about the complexity of the most simple biological cell, he would not have proffered his evolutionary theory. Because the idea that by simple mutations, well, that's the whole crux of the intelligent, well, that's one major point of the intelligent design movement. And especially Michael Behe, one of the scientists, he was a convinced evolutionist. But studying biological cells, he came to realize that it's so complex that it couldn't have arisen simply by random mutations. As I said many times, I remember at school in biology class, they taught us that this biological cells are very simple, and soon we'll be replicating them in the laboratories. And that's what they taught us. And if you write that in your exam, you get a pass. If you write that nowadays, you get a fail. Because in the meantime, they discovered that even a single cell is more complex than a modern city. It has factories and computers, and it's all very coordinated. But this is so deeply embedded in people's consciousness. Or even now, many people, they don't believe it. Maybe out of fanaticism or just, wait a minute, you see the whole life and the whole world around us, and this really came just because there was some bubbling chemicals some time ago. But evolutionary theory is used to explain every facet of human and non-human behavior. Why are you sitting like this? Why like this in particular? Your response is, that is programmed by evolutionary influences. When you become angry, when you lift your eyebrows in surprise, why do you do that? Because a long time ago in the jungle, blah, 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 blah. Why do people believe in God? What did Sigmund Freud say based on evolutionary theory? Well, because previously there was the leader of the tribe, was the father figure, and he was very strong and powerful, so that's still in the psyche, that there's some big cosmic father figure who he gives you food and this and that, but if you do something wrong, he'll smash you. So, and then you're also envious of him because you have, it's another of Freud's fantastic ideas, the Oedipus complex, because you want to have sex with your mother and you're envious of your father, and it's all based on evolutionary theory. Maybe Freud didn't know that there are concepts of God, for instance, in Vaishnava philosophy, which is not not emphasizing God the Father. And he doesn't throw you into hell forever. But this evolutionary theory is used to explain every facet of human behavior and of animals' behavior. Why do the plants grow like this? Because this, millions of years ago, this and that. And it's used to explain human culture and how history has developed. It's used to explain everything. And people have so much faith in evolutionary theory, they cannot hear anything challenging it, even if it is good science spoken by accredited scientists. Even in the 1970s, Richard Thompson and someone else, he wrote a book, Proof by Probability Theory that Life Cannot Arise from Matter. Because if you say that these are the conditions required for life to arise from matter, of course no one's ever made life from matter. But if you say that it can arise under certain conditions, but he showed that according to the science known at that time, that it's not possible for life to have arisen from matter. And that's what even the intelligent design people say today, that even if you say it could have arisen by or complex, what to speak of cells, and in whole human bodies, animal bodies, they could have arisen by chance mutation, random mutations, not chance, random. Then there's not enough time in the history of the universe for that to have happened. But if you try to even present scientifically, they can't hear it. Maybe it's something in their evolutionary development that you just can't hear something that you don't agree with. People don't like to hear things they don't agree with. So that's something to do with their evolutionary development. That's presuming there's evolutionary development, which is going round in circles. Many Christians believe in evolutionary theory, not that they're all against it. And atheists say that evolutionary theory logically and philosophically negates the need for any belief in anything supernatural. They say that, well, if you take it that the whole world is created by God, and life, you don't need God for all of this. Of course, the question arises, where does religion come from? Why is it that all over the world there are religious systems in the whole history, as much as we know? It's only known, how much do they say? 3,000, 4,000 years, they say, of history. And there are religions everywhere of different kinds. Why is there belief in the supernatural? And again, they'll say it's something left over from our evolutionary development. But why should that be? As I've often given the example, in communist times in the Soviet Union, there was mandatory teaching, just like in some schools, I know about in America, in Britain even today, it's mandatory, I think in most schools, to have religious teaching. It used to be Christian, but now it's comparative religion, something like that, different religions. So they would have mandatory from the very beginning of your education as a kid, right up to university level, mandatory atheism. And then when the Soviet Union collapsed, guess what grew up immediately? Religion. Why should that be? If it's logical that there is nothing supernatural, there's no God, it's just something which ignorant people believe, then why should it be that religion came up so strongly after at least 3 generations of atheism being hammered into people's minds? There's a need. You could say it's a psychological need, spiritual need. There's a spiritual need because there is the spiritual dimension. And there are so many things. There are spiritual. So many people have spiritual experiences. You've all had spiritual experiences, right? Otherwise, if this was just all theory, what are you doing here? But they somehow want to say that it's all an illusion. It's not real. A very cruel idea. There's no real difference between you and a block of wood, or you and a stone. So Srila Prabhupada talking about our greatest contribution. He was talking about how our devotees should take on these scientists. And Srila Prabhupada said, we are giving the solution, let them take it. This is our greatest contribution. And personally, our greatest success of life is how to love God, Krishna. That's ultimately what we're here for. We should never forget that. That at the end of all, we don't have to wait. It's not something that we have to wait for. It's here now. As I'm saying, you've all had spiritual experiences. Is it not? You all continue to have spiritual experiences. Just like we were discussing how Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was so absorbed in the kirtan. There was nothing else. He didn't know. Everyone forgot that I have my home, I have my family, I have my responsibilities. Everyone, there's nothing. It's all gone during the kirtan. It's not even gone. It's just you're chanting and that's it, and there's no other consciousness, completely absorbed in Krishna as his holy name. And of course, life has to go on still. You have a family and you have to see that all the family members get fed and all these things, but during the kirtan, just completely experience Krishna. And then the perfection is that even when engaged in other activities, such as doing work for maintaining the family, then still completely absorbed in love of Krishna. So our greatest success of life is how to love God, and our greatest pleasure is devotional service to the Lord. Where's the pleasure? No meat eating, no gambling, no illicit sex, no intoxication. Where's the pleasure? We can say to all of you, where's your pleasure in meat eating, gambling? What is your life? Everyone's doing everything. Whatever people do, they're doing it to get pleasure. But then people are so miserable. They're so unhappy. Why don't people just, if they had time, what do you do when you have a little time? Open your phone, and scroll down. You have a little time, stop and think. What am I doing? Everything I'm doing, I want to be happy, but whatever I do, it doesn't. Is happy maybe a little bit to see some little something on the screen gives you a little dunk for a second, but real happiness, where is that? Is it in a pill? That was said in the 1970s, that God has come in the form of a pill. It wasn't aspirins. It's the great delusion that something seems so wonderful, but then whatever seems wonderful, it changes, doesn't it? Vishayendriya samyogam yattad agre mritopamam pariname vishameva tatsukam rajasam smritam. This is material pleasure, sensual pleasure. In the beginning it seems just like nectar, but it turns to poison. So real pleasure is devotional service to the Lord. Krishna says, Patrang pushpang palang tayam yome bhaktya. Yome bhakti udachat. See what's going on there? It's very verse I've quoted 1,000 times. But tadaham bhakti upahritam ushnami prayatapmana. Devotee gets so much pleasure just by offering some simple food to Krishna. And the materialistic people can't understand. They don't even get, what's their pleasure in eating food? They're walking down the road eating something. What was that? A few years ago, I told this also one time. It just struck me one time. I was walking in London and there was someone, he was walking down the street, just outside our temple, just off Oxford Street. He had something to eat in his one hand and he was talking on the phone to someone. He was looking at something else in his phone. And that's his eating. That's his lunch break. He's going on working and talking and eating and just picks up something. He's not even conscious he's eating. Where's it? What is their pleasure? Our greatest pleasure is devotional service to the Lord. Then what is Srila Prabhupada's anxiety? Srila Prabhupada didn't say in this quote, my greatest anxiety, but you can understand it when he says, my anxiety that in my absence you may neglect deity worship, then the whole thing will be spoiled. That is my anxiety. Srila Prabhupada brought deities And his anxiety that they would not be properly served. He gave the example of Galagraha. You'll take it as a burden. And now we're seeing so many places that there are temples with deities and devotees don't want to serve them, they're taking it as a burden. That was Srila Prabhupada's anxiety. Srila Prabhupada had so many desires. I often think that the great block in our spiritual advancement is so many material desires, but Srila Prabhupada had so many spiritual desires, and he gave us so many spiritual desires. One of Srila Prabhupada's greatest desire was for establishing varnashram dharma, farm communities, living simply, simple life. Modern life is so complex. People are so stressed. Simple life. Establish varnashram dharma. So that's one of Srila Prabhupada's great desires, which to a large extent is unfulfilled. So that's a great challenge. We have to work on that. Books, book distribution, chanting, prasadam distribution, festivals, and we have to do the farms and varnashram dharma. Okay, I'll finish there. 7 o'clock we're going to have Gauranga Arotik Shobha, the beautiful Arati ceremony of Lord Chaitanya, and the minds of everyone in the universe will be attracted to that. Actually, in London, Srila Prabhupada, when Radha Landanishwar, they were preparing the altar, Prabhupada said, make a Vyasa-san, put one on each side of Radha Krishna, one for Brahma and one for Narad Muni, because they come here every day. Shiva Shuka Narada Preme Gada Gada Brahma Adi Kare Devagon. They'll all come, perform kirtan, and the demigods will come. That's not the greatest success. If the demigods come. But it's a sign of success that they're so attracted. We know again, there are so many instances. There's a big hall was rented for Srila Prabhupada in the 1960s, 1966, 67. Big hall, and devotees didn't do proper publicity, and only a handful of people came. Srila Prabhupada went, he did a kirtan, he gave a whole long speech, and afterwards devotees apologized, said, oh, Srila Prabhupada, hardly anyone was there. He said, didn't you see? Brahma was there, all the demigods were there. When a pure devotee speaks, all the demigods come. Hare Krishna. Vancha kalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya.